person and represents the area of Peekskill and Ossining and surroundings, and Anne Rabe from NYPIRG. And the focus for tonight is to give us an update on what's going on in Albany. And especially at this time, we've got a delayed budget. There's other things happening. So it's we organized this before we kind of knew that the budget would be late, whatever. So we're going to hear right from Assemblywoman Dana Levenberg about what's going on and what, if anything, we can do to help make sure this process benefits our environment. And then from Anne Rabe, who is very knowledgeable from NYPIRG, New York Public Interest Research Group is what NYPIRG stands for, if you don't know the acronym, to give us updates on legislation and other really important things that will impact the work we do here. So this is our agenda. I do want to start with an exciting update, which is that, and I think Sue is on tonight, Sue McNamara, who really spearheaded the effort in Yonkers to get a pilot program for curbside food scraps recycling going. So Sue, if you're on and you want to unmute and tell us about this award so we can congratulate you, feel free.
Well, it's nice to be recognized for doing the right thing, but it was basically a very group effort. We had about 10 families starting out saying, what should we do? And there's no place to drop our food scraps. We were going to Hastings, but that really wasn't fair to the village of Hastings. But then we worked together with the DPW, the Department of Public Works, and they said, gee, I think we're looking for a pilot program. Maybe it can be you. And it really worked out very, very well. But from 10 families, the struggle was to really counter some of the ideas that it's going to bring cockroaches and vermin and it's going to smell bad. All of which is so untrue, but yet people have this fantasy that their food scraps are better going down this chute than being segregated into a separate bin. But I think we have counteracted it for the most part. We now have about 78 families cooperating, and we've done over 10 tons of food scraps away from the Peekskill incinerator, and we're also going to get from DPW a load of fresh compost for our public community garden. So it's a win-win.
Awesome.
Whatever we can do to promote it is great. They do have to roll it out to more places. We don't want to be the poster child and the only one doing it. We want a lot more people to do it. So
well,
nothing. Us, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And nothing proves it's possible better than actually just going ahead and doing it. So congrats to you and to everybody that got that program working and for, helping to proselytize. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
So with that, I am going to stop sharing. And we are going to jump right in. We're going to start with our Assembly member, Dana Levenberg, to give us an update because she's super busy, and this way she can be free to either stay on or to run and fulfill her other commitments. But Assemblywoman, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for your around-the-clock, year-round efforts to promote environmental causes in Albany and in here in 8095. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Courtney. And it's so great to hear about successes with food scrap recycling. I know that was something that that we jumped into in town of Boston when I was the supervisor there. And, it's grown and grown and grown, and they've had to add more and more of the bins, the big bins to collect. And it was, being done in a town park. But also, always, I think that there's a little bit of hesitancy when you start anything like that. And we had done, again, our research, and I'm guessing that that you did too, Susan, but, I spent a lot of time looking at Scarsdale's program, and they really launched the whole thing for the county. And they did such good work finding the perfect bins and things like that, so I mean, I don't know about you, but you know, you got the bin under your sink or in your, you know, someplace in your kitchen, and it really doesn't smell. I mean, yeah, it's a pain to clean it out, but you know, we have to make these little bit of sacrifices for the greater good. And it's a great program, and I just hope that, you know, that we're able to continue to expand it. And actually, one of the bills I'm on does call for more producer responsibility around composting and food scrap recycling. So just really quickly, you know, we had an earthquake on Friday, and that was really significant because it's something that our area doesn't. And actually, maybe Courtney, we should ask the follow-up, which is, did you feel the earthquake, and where were you during the earthquake? So we had the earthquake, we had the eclipse, and who knows what's coming next. But you know, I know the first thing that I was thinking about was Indian Point, and I know that I'm really glad that the fuel that you know, most of the spent fuel is in the dry cask storage. But you know, there's still the question of, what does seismic activity or kind of impact does it have? Certainly, we're hoping that it's very little. But you know, as a reminder, I did get many emails asking, well, are we safe? And we have asked that we get some more guidance as a member of the DOB, you know, to make sure that we actually did things that were supposed to happen and kick in during seismic activity did, and that not only are the casks being looked at, but the spent fuel pool with the crack in it, like anything that might have shifted or could have had, you know, been impacted by the earthquake, and including you know, Enbridge's gas lines. We really want to know what the, you know, if there was any structural integrity that was compromised, but also that the processes are in place to make sure, for example, that Enbridge gets the notification that they should, and that they immediately act upon it to make sure that that there are no deficiencies, I guess we could say, point. But it certainly also underscores our need to avoid continuing to site new pipelines here. And, you know, we know that there are the two fault lines that intersect right around there, and, you know, just don't really know overall what the ongoing impact is going to be. So we need to continue to be extremely vigilant. And this latest earthquake just highlights that. Yes, California was laughing at us, but still, you know, it was a big deal. I was actually down at the waterfront outside of Sing Sing, and I was in my car, and I didn't feel it at all. I got a text from my son who was up the hill at my house, and he's like, "Mom, did you feel the earthquake?" I said, "No, I didn't. I'm right here watching the river was very rough, but I didn't feel anything." So I thought that was really interesting. And I've heard that people who were in the cars tended not to feel anything. So I guess that those rubber tires helped. Yes, we don't have a budget yet. We were past our April 1st deadline, and negotiations are still ongoing. And we're kind of going through step by step. And good news for anybody who has kids or grandchildren in school, it does look like our education aid is going to be restored to what it was last year, plus the additional amount that we had been anticipating. But with the hold harmless agreement still in place, and with a better CPI factor for the calculation. And if anybody was following any of these things, and I know that that's not your guys' issue, but I just thought I'd throw it out there because that's, of course, one of the very important issues that we negotiate as part of the budget, which is the education funding for our schools. And we want to make sure that we get it right. We are also planning, and hopefully this will be in the final budget, that there will be a study that will hopefully have public input, and certainly hearing from our school business officials as we move forward to improve the formula for that, the foundation aid formula, so that it actually keeps up with where we are instead of the 20 years ago when it was put in place, which we're very happy it was put in place. We're glad it was finally fully funded, and shout out to Sandy Gala for making sure that got done. Well, last year I got to vote on that, but the year before, you know, that was put in place, that was going to happen. So I see Sandy's on, so I wanted to just give her a shout out for that. And but we are still pushing for priorities like the New York Heat Act and the Climate Change Superfund Act, which would actually hold polluters responsible for for the improvements that we need as we move forward. And also the money that was stripped from the Clean Water Infrastructure Fund and used to fund staffing elsewhere. Like, we want that back, the $500 million for clean water infrastructure grants, which we know our communities need desperately, especially as we're trying to increase housing infrastructure. We know we need clean water infrastructure. We're going to increase housing infrastructure, and the $400 million from the Environmental Protection Fund. So we're continuing to fight for that. We haven't actually conferenced it yet because they're working on some of these other bigger items, including Medicaid and the education. And now we know also that we'll be talking a lot more about housing, and that's, you know, something that's also obviously critically important, which is to protect, to have tenant protections in place, and also to have you know, be able to build more housing, build more affordable housing, and you know, different levels of affordability for our housing stock, and also make sure that we have good labor standards in place, and wages that are you know, actually are going to be good living wages for the people who are in the trenches building out the housing infrastructure. So that's kind of those are the big picture items that we're working on right now. I'm hopeful that we're going to have something done by this weekend / beginning of next week. So fingers crossed, but no guarantees. Other legislation that I'm working on, and I think we'll start to see roll out after the budget gets done. I co-sponsor the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, as well as actually my colleague Mary Jane Shimsky has introduced the food donation and food scrap recycling program expansion, which is really making, again, food producers responsible for their waste, so that it can either help people who are food insecure or be composted and not, again, go into the regular waste stream. I also co-sponsor a Emily Gallagher bill, which would require applicants for major projects near environmental justice communities to submit enhanced public participation plans. And I know you guys would definitely like that. So that's a couple of things. And then some of my prime sponsored legislation that I'm continuing to work on is the bill that would put more solar energy into the grid by streamlining solar canopy construction in parking lots. That's already cleared space. It's something that's passed multiple times in the Senate, and we can't seem to get it to move in the Assembly. But I can tell you that Assemblywoman Glick, who chairs ENCON in the Assembly, has said she's now ready to talk to me about it. The big concern that they have is that by getting rid of the need for the legislation, that the alienation of parkland legislation that would be required for each park, they think that it might be a slippery slope, that it could be used. So we have a couple of ideas for fixes that would make it seem less of an issue, but they seem to also have something up their sleeve that they haven't shared with me yet, of a way to still make this possible to move forward more quickly and expedite it without opening up, you know, what they think might be a can of worms. So I'll continue to work on that. I'm hopeful that we are going to be able to get something passed out of committee this session. So that's good news. I also have a bill that would require inclusion of complete streets principles for state and local transportation projects undertaken by DOT, or which receive both federal and state funding and are subject to DOT oversight. So again, we want to have walkable, bikeable streets with crosswalks, and you know, wherever you might need the little road tables or speed bumps or things to slow people down and let people actually smell the roses as they move around, and not just be built for our passenger vehicle culture. We really need to start getting away from that. So that's another bill that I am the prime sponsor of. I also have a bill which would require the publication of an annual report on the environmental radiation surveillance program. So that's another area that we think is really important. So I'm going to continue to work on that. Other bills that I've co-sponsored are ones, this one recently passed the Assembly, which was the bill to ban fracking using CO2 instead of water. And this seemed to be something that would have been like a workaround for the fracking, the fossil fuel industry to get to work around the legislation that I know that Sandy was instrumental in getting passed, certainly, so that to disallow fracking. And I still remember that trip that we took out to Pennsylvania. And I've talked about it on the Assembly floor, actually during the debate over this CO2 fracking bill, and how Pennsylvania was really bragging about, how great fracking was for the economy. And we saw the devastation that it left in its wake. So, we weren't really convinced. And I know that Sandy, again, worked very hard to keep fracking out of New York State. So we don't want to fracture those protections, pun intended, and open up the ability for workarounds. And CO2 fracking is just as bad as water fracking. So that again passed the Assembly recently. I also co-sponsor a bill which would authorize and direct the DEC commissioner to conduct a study on food waste initiatives and provide recommendations. And then a variety of bills to get the PFAS out of our personal care products and clothing. There's also a bill by Assemblyman Carroll that relates to declaring a climate emergency and banning new fossil fuel infrastructure. I have a bill with Senator May that actually I'm a prime sponsor on, which looks at planning for New York being one of the few states that has clean water, and people actually migrating to New York from other states because there won't be clean water elsewhere. And how can we plan for that eventuality to make sure that we're ready for the changes that we anticipate will come as clean water becomes less and less of something that we can count on elsewhere. But of course, we need to keep ours clean too. So we'll go back to that budget item. And then the Assemblymember Glick sponsors the Climate Corporate Accountability Act, which I co-sponsor. And also there's a Stop Climate Polluters Act, which Joanne Simon sponsors, that I also co-sponsor. And finally, Anna Kellis, Assembly member, sponsors the Fashion Sustainability Act, which looks at the impact of, of the fashion industry on the environment and on economic justice and on labor standards, from, sort of end to end of that, of the actual production of and delivery of clothing. And it's really a really very interesting bill that I'm happy to be a co-sponsor. So that's kind of like, that's my update. I know we have a DOB meeting coming up. I think it got moved now to June. I can't actually, I forget what the date is, but I think the next one is in June. We had to.
Oh, they canceled
skip
for
over.
April?
No, maybe they did. No, maybe that was, we moved it to April.
DOB
I'm
for
sorry
folks.
that I should have that.
For the uninitiated, it's a decommissioning oversight board that is focused on Indian Point.
So sorry, I always thought it was just division of budget for the longest time, because it is that too. But yes, the decommissioning oversight board. It is possible that April, and I don't know, maybe if anybody from my staff is on and we have the date, maybe you guys could post it. I'm not sure.
I mean, I've got it on my calendar for that date. So
April 25th.
Yep.
I believe you. Okay, that sounds right. Do I have it on my calendar?
And then is there anything?
Yeah, and that's, I'm hoping that's
awesome.
ahead,
and then for other folks, like if I put a link in the chat to all of the legislation that Dana mentioned that she's co-sponsoring, but you can also use that second link I just put in to really easily let your senator or assembly member know that you support a piece of legislation. So I'm lucky, right? Like Dana knows I support and she's here. But if you have a different assembly member or a different senator who's not on board with some of these pieces of legislation yet, you can use that link if you're afraid to call their office. And, you know, it lets you make an account and you can literally like click like support this and send a message to them through that site to let them know that you support this legislation. And it sounds like especially the solar canopies in parking lots of parks could in the assembly could use that help. So
Yeah, and we definitely could use that help for sure. That would be great. And I do appreciate that very much. And thanks for setting that all up. And somebody just said, what is the holdup with the budget? So I mean, I can only say that as our speaker said, well, we'd rather have a great budget than a mediocre budget that's on time. I know that, you know, our last governor was very big on getting the budgets on time. Before that, the budgets went very long. But I do think that we're getting pretty close. And usually the holdup is something. In this case, I think that the biggest thing is housing, although there's definitely a lot of stuff going on. I mean, there's stuff going on about cannabis enforcement, not of, you know, the legal shops, but the illegal smoke and vape shops that are illegally selling cannabis. And, you know, sort of around the state, there are a lot of issues with that. So that's something big, you know, sort of just being negotiated. I think housing is the biggest. Medicaid also huge because the governor pulled a lot of money out. And we think that there is a way for us to get federal dollars that are sort of on the table for the taking if we do it right, to offset some of the state's costs and therefore be able to do better with, you know, paying the better wages. We're, again, you know, there's increasing the cost of living factor for many of our home healthcare workers. Right now, you may have heard about CDPAP, which I always forget, but it's basically a consumer directed personal assistance program, I think, which basically is for, you know, people who are either aging in place or disabled and want to have want to make their own choices about who and how they take care of themselves and or are cared for. That it, you know, it was a program that would pay different people or go through agencies. And apparently we have 700 fiscal intermediaries currently in the program, and they're looking at different models around the US to see if we can find a way to make it more efficient and more effective, because I believe that $1.5 billion went to administrative fees, and we'd rather see the money go to the workers and the people to make sure that it actually gets into the hands of the people who need it most. So that's again, I'm sure if you're paying any attention to, you know, any of the budget stuff, that we're getting a lot of pushback right now because they wanted to go from 700 fiscal intermediaries to one. This is still ongoing conversation, but again, I think that, you know, it's really just trying to trim back where there might be fat, if it is fat, and or make more efficient processes so that we can make sure that the services are actually getting to the people who need them.
Dina, there was another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there was another question in the chat that I think a lot of people are thinking about, which is the departure of Basil Sagos from the DEC and what's going to happen.
Yes.
Are we, I mean, it's not like they've been really bulldogs enforcing environmental laws to begin with, but are things going to get worse, better?
I don't think things are going to get worse, but I know that a lot of people really did like Basil Sagos, and that he really made an impact. I mean, it was completely, as far as I can tell, it was his choice, not, you know, it wasn't my impression that he was pushed out or anything like that. So I think he was just looking for a different opportunity. I don't really have any intel on that at this moment. But I will keep my ear to the ground to see if we can get some more information about next steps. So I'll you know, to be continued, I guess. Until when I get some more information, I'll be happy to share it with you, Courtney, and you can share it out with everybody.
Great. All right, Dana, thank you so much for taking the time and updating
Yeah,
us
and just
all. Very appreciated.
and I know I'm looking forward to thanks again for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to participating in I Love My Parks Day. Hopefully we'll have the budget by then. I think it's May 5th. Um, and also Earth Day celebrations coming up in Austin and Croton. Somebody just posted that Mothers Out Front is collecting dresses, and there's lots of great opportunities to learn and share. So again, looking forward to continuing to fight the good fight for our environment. As you know, I always say, like, you know, we can't be just doing one thing. We kind of have to do everything all at once, because we just wasted so much time not doing anything. So hoping that we will continue to move in that direction. And we I know up in Albany, we so appreciate the advocates, and so we certainly appreciate all of your great work and your advocacy and your help, because that's how we got Save the Hudson passed. And you know, we have to keep fighting that fight too, and make sure that we keep our river clean, and you know, we don't let the barges come back down every minute. And you know, there's a lot of work that we still have to do to protect the Hudson. And grateful again to Riverkeeper, and I think they might bring the Clearwater concert back. I heard that might be coming back. So lots of good stuff on the horizon, and let's just keep working together. Thanks again for the opportunity.
All right, thank you, Dana. And I want to jump right into Anne's presentation so that we have time for questions for her at the end, because I'm sure folks will have them. So Anne, why don't you take it away?
Oh, thanks, Courtney, and thanks, Dana. I just wanted to say that it's just wonderful to hear your robust environmental legislative agenda, Dana. And I just wanted to mention that the Environmental Radiation Surveillance Bill, it's dear to my heart, because the DEC and the Department of Health every year in the 1980s and 1990s put out an annual report of the radiation monitoring of milk, strontium-90 around nuclear reactors, of deer, of fish, and other wildlife. And we all got to see that every year. And it's just stopped under Governor Pataki. So I'm so glad to hear about that bill. Also, the food scraps, I just wanted to let you know that the Pollution Prevention Institute at the University of Rochester, it's a state designated institute, and they received, I think, $5 million a couple of years ago for a food scraps project. So I know I don't want to speak for them, but they might have some resources. They're worth looking into. They get state funding every year. And lastly, the Earth Day package of bills. You have any intel on the Earth Day package of bills after the budget and when that might be?
Oh, it might be during the budget. I don't know. Yes,
Okay.
right. So it's I haven't heard anything yet. I would love it if they include the solar canopy bill. That would be amazing. But I don't know if that'll happen. But no, I haven't heard anything yet. But if you have any requests, send them my way, and I'll try to see what I can do.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay.
So I'll start
Yeah.
presentation. I'm just giving highlights, folks, of the environmental aspects of the state budget. First on climate, and of course, there's a huge solid waste factor in terms of climate, and then on the key solid waste bills. So I'll just share the screen here for this PowerPoint. The view from Albany, the New York State budget and the environment. And basically, you know, just a reminder, of course, we know that the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the Climate Act, has very important goals. And we know, basically, based on reports in the last year from state agencies, that we're in jeopardy on reaching the 2030 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emission goal. So just mentioning that because when we look at the main sources of greenhouse gases, of course, solid waste is 12%, which may well be an underestimate, according to Bob Howarth, the Cornell scientist on the Climate Action Council. And it's so important that groups like yours are there doing the grassroots to state house work. It's so, so important. So delving into the first climate related bill, which is the Climate Superfund. 7 years ago, the state agency NYSERDA estimated we need at least $10 billion a year to implement the Climate Act. This is a quote from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, talking about the fact that the oil and gas companies, which have made phenomenal profits since 2021, they have made nearly $900 billion in profits. And that, basically they benefited from the greenhouse gas emissions and the use of gas and oil that is now causing this severe climate crisis. So when we look at who should pay, we say big oil should pay its fair share. And that's what the Climate Change Superfund's all about. It's being seriously considered in the budget. It was in the Senate One House budget. The Assembly in their One House budget memo said that they support Climate Superfund and polluter pay principle. They were concerned about consumer prices increasing at the gas pump. And for folks to know that in the last 3 weeks, Peter Howard, who's a premier economist from NY School of Law, he briefed both the governor's staff and the Assembly Speaker's staff about the fact that it will not cause a consumer price increase at the gas pumps. It's based on past emissions, and it doesn't have to do with future production costs. And there's also a market factor. So Hess gas station, for instance, Hess, the company, would not be one of the companies that emitted over 1 billion tons in greenhouse gas emissions over an 18-year period in the past. So they would basically keep their gas prices the same. And ExxonMobil, which did emit massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, would basically use their past profits to keep their gas level the same, because if they made them higher, people wouldn't go to their gas station. So it's just sort of a basic, market forces aspect of that. And the economists, they think that they comprehensively address the governor's concerns and the Assembly Speaker's concerns. So that's just a tangent on that, because that's sort of been a holdup on the Climate Change Superfund Act. But it's enjoying widespread support. Over 400 organizations support it. It was in the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus's people's budget. And what it does is it raises $3 billion a year for massive upgrades in our roads, bridges, subways, stormwater drainage. It also does climate damage repair and community protection programs, addressing escalating heat waves with cooling centers and air conditioning in poor neighborhoods, schools, nursing homes, et cetera. Healthcare costs related to climate in terms of asthma from air pollution, and in terms of extreme heat, et cetera. So it's a really important program. And wanted to mention that out of that $3 billion, just like the Climate Act, 35% of it has to go to disadvantaged communities. And so that $1 billion, we took a look at that, NYPIRG, and we issued a report with a host of environmental justice organizations last week at the state capitol. And we looked at dividing that $1 billion by the 1,736 census tracts that have been designated by DEC as disadvantaged communities. In Westchester County, you have 101 of those designated disadvantaged community census tracts, 101. So we looked at that in terms of $1 billion divided by that 1,736, and potentially Westchester County, for instance, could receive $58 million a year for 25 years in a row for those disadvantaged community census tract neighborhoods to get community protection programs, climate damage repair, resilience upgrades, everything we need to deal with the climate crisis of today. Last year, by the way, looking at Governor Hochul's news releases, you and I, the taxpayers, paid $2.2 billion for those programs because we don't have any dedicated fund for the Climate Act. So this is a win-win bill, and we're really hopeful that the governor will join the Assembly and Senate in including this in the state budget. In terms of actions, we have a Twitter storm, going on tomorrow, and Instagram and Facebook. We're hoping to get 100,000 people to tweet the governor or Instagram or Facebook her. And we also have an Action Network letter to the governor. We have close to 500 people that have signed on. So please consider signing on to this. And I will, Courtney, if it's okay, I'll send some of these actions to you and you can share them with people in the group.
Sure. And I'll go to your email that you sent and drop that link in the chat right now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So you may remember Lois Gibbs, of the Mother of Federal Superfund, from the Love Canal toxic waste dump in Niagara Falls that created the 1980 Federal Superfund cleanup program. She gave us a quote for that environmental justice news conference that by failing to include this bill in the state budget, the governor in essence is rejecting that $1 billion a year for disadvantaged communities. And this has gained a lot of traction among assembly members and senators. I mean, they get this, especially when they look at our county by county analysis that shows how much money these communities could be getting paid for, not by the taxpayers, but by big oil polluters. So we're hopeful that that's going to happen. And lastly, a heads up, we just found out today that the DEC and the Environmental Protection Agency are starting a statewide environmental justice listening tour. It's kicking off next Monday at Niagara Falls. So we're talking with a number of Western New York EJ leaders about showing up at that and saying Erie County, for instance, could get $40 million a year from the Climate Superfund. Niagara County could get $19 million a year, again, for those disadvantaged communities. And so we hope keep your eyes open, your ears open in terms of hearing about that coming to the lower Hudson Valley at some point in the next 6 months. The DEC didn't have a schedule yet when I called them this morning, but just a heads up on that. And then two other really important climate bills, the Home Energy Affordable Transition Act that the Assembly member mentioned, the HEAT Act, very, very critical for us to finally begin to implement the Climate Act's law in requiring a transition away from gas and oil to renewable energy. I mean, we have a 2030 goal we have to reach. So we're really hopeful that the two houses and the governor will, as much as possible, include the whole bill. The governor put parts of the bill in, the assembly put parts of the bill in. We really hope that the whole bill will happen. And I know that Renewable Heat Now, you probably get emails from them, but I think that they have a call relay happening later this week. And I'll let Courtney know about that in terms of an action on the HEAT Act. Lastly is the End Climate Polluter Handouts Act, which we call the sister bill to Climate Superfund. Right now, you and I are paying for $1.5 billion in taxpayer subsidies to the fossil fuel industry for research and development, for just sort of lifting them up in terms of like the airline industry. So what this bill does is it takes a baby step. It's been over the last 7 years, this bill has now slowly gone from 1.5 billion elimination of those taxpayer subsidies down to the most egregious 265 million. And we are really, really hoping that the Assembly and Senate will push the governor to include that. It frees up $265 million. It shouldn't be going to the fossil fuel industry anyway. And it's a really important first step in terms of a policy reform. So those are the three big climate bills. And then on solid waste, of course, everyone's favorites, the Packaging Reduction Recycling Infrastructure Act, which I call the PRA bill. It's a long title, which of course cuts plastic packaging in half in 12 years, 50%. It's a really important goal. And remaining packaging has to be reusable or reach a 70% recycling rate, prohibits some of the priority toxic chemicals that are in packaging material that are polluting our landfills and incinerators. And then the Bigger, Better Bottle Bill, which has been a NYPIRG priority for 8 years now, 40 years, started in 1982, highly successful recycling program, the state's first ever. And all it does is expand it to include non-carbonated beverage bottles and alcohol beverages, which are now going into landfills and filling them up, and incinerators, unfortunately. It also increases the deposit after 40 years from a nickel to a dime. And it's projected to increase recycling, according to the national group Reloop, from 70% to 90%. And substantially, again, reduce waste going into our solid waste facilities. So these two bills, we were trying to get, NYPIRG was trying to get the bottle bill in the budget, didn't happen. So these two sister bills, there's a big lobby day coming up on May 14th, which Beyond Plastics, NYPIRG, and a number of other groups are organizing, and we urge you to consider coming up to Albany. It'll be a lot of fun, and it'll be very, very impactful. Beyond Plastics and NYPIRG, we schedule lots and lots of meetings with legislators, which is key, as well as news conferences, and just, networking and sharing each other's stories about what you're doing on solid waste locally. It's just really important. That's that social glue and that solidarity. So urge you to put that on your agenda, May 14th. And then also there is a sign-on letter for the Packaging Reduction Act to the Senate and Assembly leadership which I'll share with Courtney, and there's a deadline of April 29th. So those are post-budget big priorities. We hope both of them will be in the Earth Day package, which anyone, based on the budget, when it passes, we're not quite sure. It's probably not going to be Monday, Earth Day, April 22nd, but hopefully sometime soon after. So that's just a quick snapshot of where we are from the view of one in Albany advocate. Thanks a lot.
Ooh, I feel like I need to wipe my brow. That was a lot. Thank you, Anne. And I was furiously typing and trying to put things in the chat so that people have links. So one additional event that Anne didn't mention was there's going to be a virtual like power hour climate action party to support the Packaging Reduction Act. That is going to be on May 8th. I had emailed you all about it. It was originally going to be today, but it got pushed because of the budget. So all those are in there. And I see Dana's got her hand raised. So Dana, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing about the New York heat, which is my understanding that the utilities like Con Ed, they're supportive of it because they actually don't want to have to pay, be building. They want to spend the money on other things, but they're forced to build that, the pipes in that 100-foot connection. So they're actually supportive, which is very helpful, I think, for New York heat. And I think that there was also some other kind of an agreement reached with the utilities. So I think New York heat actually has a really good chance. I'm not sure if it's going to be perfectly the way that we want it. And like Anne said, already some rollbacks, but it does seem like there's some worker protections in there that are also good. And, I think hopefully we'll see that move.
Thank you, Dana. So folks, any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand or something like that. If you've got questions on any of these bills. Oh, I guess I do have one, which is the same one that we asked Dana earlier, Anne, which is any insights into what impact Basil Segos's stepping down will have on the DEC and on enforcement. And I know as I sit here one block from a Title V air emitter whose permit expired in 2019, and then the trash incinerator whose permit expired in 2021, and nothing has been done. And my emails to the environmental justice deputy commissioner have gone totally ignored. So any insights, Anne?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that very problem. I don't think we're going to see too much change with the new commissioner. I mean, the commissioners, their boss is the governor, so they act at the behest of the governor in terms of, which laws to especially pay attention to in terms of implementation. And they're also, their hands are tied in terms of staff shortages. I mean, I don't know if folks remember, but under Governor Pataki, almost 1,000 DEC staff were laid off or sought early retirement with an enticement, and they have never been reinstated. So one of the things we kept hearing over and over again on Climate Superfund, for instance, is, well, DEC is going to do this program, but do they have the staff? Well, no, they don't have the staff. So just like with state Superfund on toxic cleanup programs, part of those chemical industry fees pay for DEC and DOH staff to monitor those sites cleaned up by polluters. The same thing's got to happen with Climate Superfund and other climate programs and other solid waste programs. We need to, with specific requirements in terms of, improvements, for instance, on solid waste recycling, we need to provide the resources that DEC desperately needs to do the job correctly. That's part of the problem with enforcement. But I also should mention that I got a call from a DEC whistleblower right before Christmas. And this person is an air toxics engineer. And they had been laid off, indefinite suspended leave, administrative leave, because they spoke out against a DEC policy of not renewing Title V air permits and state air permits every 5 years like you're supposed to. We're a delegated state by EPA to do that. Every 5 years, the DEC is supposed to look at these facilities that are putting out large amounts of toxic emissions, make sure that they are reducing those emissions if there is new technology to do so, or if it's causing a problem. This facility that this person spoke out about is a facility in the middle of a bladder cancer cluster. The workers at this facility out in Western New York, they've been studied and they have high rates of bladder cancer. They're next to a fence line environmental justice community, which obviously Department of Health has characterized as a bladder cancer cluster. So it's a serious health problem. And the DEC with this engineer was going to allow this facility to continue their permit and extend it indefinitely without having them modify their permit to meet new, more restrictive, more protective toxic emission standards. So this person is still on administrative leave, but working with some other labor and environmental health advocates in Western New York, the DEC got wind of it and they filed a notice of violation and are requiring this facility to now upgrade their emission system, greatly reduce that bladder cancer carcinogen, and move forward. But this whistleblower sent me another 50 Title V plants around the state that I'm going to share with Courtney. I'm sure there's some in your area. We need to look at all of those because in fairness, it could be DC's understaffed, but it's also a position of the commissioner to not require these 5-year permit renewals, but to allow them to go indefinitely. I mean, we're looking at some of them where the last time the permit was renewed was 2007. And that includes landfills as well. For instance, the Brookhaven landfill, last time it was renewed, the permit was at least 9 years ago. So that's that's just the tip of the iceberg, I fear, in terms of what I've seen DEC do in relation to toxic contamination problems. And I just wanted to mention that just because it just happened and we're still dealing with that. There are some great candidates for DEC commissioner, and there are some that I'm very worried about that have I would say a conflict of interest. So I hope the governor picks the right person. But again, strong laws and adequate funding is all about really making sure the DEC does its job correctly.
Yeah, there was someone messaged me with a question. Are there any mapping options online for seeing purported cancer clusters?
Yeah, the Department of Health has a cancer registry, and you can get that. I'll get the link from my friend, the industrial hygienist. I'll make a note of that to send you the cancer mapping. Yep.
Thank you. And then another question from Donna, I think for either Dana or Anne. Are there any bills that target EV infrastructure in New York?
Senator Krueger has a
I would
bill.
just say, like, I think CLCPA is. No, I was just going to say that I think overall that there's the regulations. I don't know if there's specific legislation, but go ahead, Anne. And you probably do know, and I don't.
Yeah, all I know is, that there's been a lot of headway made in terms of electrifying school buses, et cetera, and that Senator Krueger has been pushing an EV car charger grade expansion bill, which is really needed. The New York Power Authority got funding, and they're according to the state controller's audit last year, they're about 4 years behind. I mean, we're behind almost every other state in terms of setting up EV car charging stations. So Senator Krueger's got a couple good bills. It requires any new building has to have so many EV car chargers, et cetera. But I'm not the expert on transportation and climate, sorry.
Dana, did you have anything else to add?
I was just gonna say, I mean, we've been getting, a lot of pushback about the EV school bus requirements from colleagues across the state because we're hearing that the infrastructure isn't there. And again, my understanding is that we're sort of going to target first implementing the infrastructure and then making sure that that they can that we can get buses. My thought was that the state should purchase the buses. Because then we have to buy an awful lot of them and then distribute them. But obviously, we need the infrastructure, and it is complicated because of the siting and wherever the buses park, et cetera, and where would they charge. So it is complicated. I don't think that there's an easy, straightforward path, but I know that that we are considering the best way forward to make sure that, you know, we can actually implement what we need to.
Great. Yeah, I would love it if, so Dana had mentioned earlier the 100-foot rule, which is that if you want to switch your house to natural gas in an area that, say, Con Edison services, they use our ratepayer dollars to cover the construction on that last 100 feet from like the nearest distribution line to the person's house. So we're paying for a lot, and I still have neighbors that are getting hooked up to natural gas, and it kills me. But I would love it if instead of that 100-foot rule, they did the 100-foot rule of getting you the higher voltage and amps for your house so that you can be all electric. My husband and I made the like expensive decision to kick fossil fuels to the curb at our house. And we have a plug-in electric hybrid, and we have a 14-year-old who will soon be driving and will probably need another car in this area where there's inadequate public transportation, which is really the ideal. Is we don't all need cars, we have public transport, but the cost and the wait and how long it took for Con Edison to come out and have the supplies available, it took a really long time for them to even for our electrician to even source the materials, and then to get Con Ed to come out and actually move us over to the higher amperage so that we could have an electric stove, induction stove, and the charger and everything, and just be fully electric. So, you know, it's like, if we're going to pay for the last 100 feet of something, let's make it moving home, like dealing with the expense of moving homes to be all electric. So any other questions in the chat? If not, I'll move on to my last bit of stuff about upcoming events.
Could I just mention one emerging issue, which you're going to hear about in
Sure.
a couple of weeks? So sort of under the radar screen, the DEC, they first proposed PFAS soil cleanup standards for Superfund and brownfield sites in 2020 in proposed regulation changes for brownfield and Superfund site cleanups. And they proposed them at, I believe it was 600 and 800 parts per trillion, which is pretty protective. It's based on some pretty protective criteria. And last month, they struck out those two proposed standards and are now doing, without any public input, they are now doing a background soil survey for PFAS. Now, I worked on the original soil cleanup standards in 2004 to 2006. They did a heavy metal background soil survey because those are naturally occurring, right? Lead, arsenic, those are naturally occurring. PFAS is not a naturally occurring family of chemicals. It's not naturally occurring. So why would DEC do a background soil survey for something that's not naturally occurring? I fear it's the Love Canal situation, which is they're trying to legitimize background levels of PFAS and then raise that 600 to 800 parts per trillion, raise it to allow more contamination to be left at sites, because everywhere. And it's a problem, but that doesn't mean we give up and start to legitimize background levels of PFAS. So we're going to be, we as in a number of organizations, we're working with some national health and environmental experts. We're going to be pushing the DEC to put a pause on that background soil survey. This is setting a major, major policy decision without any public input. Put a pause on that background soil survey and look at the EPA's recent announcement on drinking water standards for PFAS. Look at the fact that EPA has said, and many, many other scientists, there's no safe level for PFAS. And look at the fact that we have water filters now that will take 100% of PFAS out of water. So we should just put a pause button and we can clean up contaminated PFAS soil. It may just take a number of years until we have the right technology, but we shouldn't give up. So we're sending you an alert out about that, and I hope you'll join us. The DEC has a May 15th hearing on this proposed brownfield Superfund regulation, which includes that struck out part of the PFAS standards. and includes the background soil survey. And we're asking for an extension because we think we all need a lot more time. We do not want to make, decisions that are going to haunt future generations in terms of not having a goal of fully cleaning up PFAS contamination. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Thanks. And maybe, and since we're close to time, Nancy Van asked in the chat, I think she's asking, how would the EPA, today's EPA action affect New York PFAS? So there was just the news today about the EPA change. So maybe you can do that in the chat so that
Sure.
I can, thank you
Sure.
so much. All right, so I am going to share my slides again. Sorry, hold on. Just to go over very briefly some upcoming events that we have so that everybody knows, and then we'll be all set. And you have all those action items from Anne that were in the chat, as well as the links to how to let your legislators know about the state action or the state legislation that you support. So we have a lot of stuff coming up for this month. So there is an Earth Day event at Rockefeller State Park. That is the same day as the Ossining Earth Day event. And when I stop I'm sharing right now, and I didn't share the I don't know if Caitlin, if you can get into the presentation to find the link in the chat or in the notes for this slide to the Rockefeller State Park Earth Day info. Will be in Bedford. We will also be at Green Ossening's amazing and huge Earth Day event. We will also be in Croton for their Earth Day event. So those are all coming up in April. But one thing to really draw your attention to is this Sunday in Yonkers is the Westchester Social Forum for 2024. And you can see the link in that poster is westpac.org/WSF. It's a really great program. I, along with Santosh from Food and Water Watch, will be giving their featured workshop and panel discussion, but then WASS will also have a workshop on our Westchester waste system. We'll also be tabling, and we did invest in some really cool stickers and pens made from recycled materials, and we'll have info and fact sheets and all kinds of stuff that can help you with your advocacy. So I hope that we'll be seeing you and you'll stop by our table and say hi, and instead of just being a face in a box, we'll actually get to see you and at some of these events. And thank you all again for your consistency and your advocacy, because I think we've heard straight from Assemblywoman Levenberg that it really makes a difference. So thank you all and have a very good night.
Thank you.